Hello and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn. Hope you are well and cheerful on this Friday morning. Lovely to see you. Lovely day outside. Looking forward to a good day today. Good news, the Alpha course went very, very well. The first session of the Alpha course last night, I certainly enjoyed it. The people that came along seemed to as well. There are spaces. If anyone would like to join in next week, you're very, very welcome to do so. To remind you, this weekend we have various services for you to enjoy, virtually, so to speak, or online. We have a meditation, 5:30 tomorrow evening from St Bart's. We have a live stream service from St Bart's on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. We have a service from St Anne's at 11:45 and a choral evensong from St Bart's at 5:30 on Sunday evening. Lots of services for you to enjoy online, and do come and worship with us. It'd be great to have you. And just to remind you, the good news with the roadmap and so on, our hope and my prayer is for us to reopen public worship again on Easter Sunday. Wouldn't it be great and give us something to really look forward to at the end of Lent, at the end of all this, so to speak, if we can worship together on Easter Sunday? Wouldn't it be a great way of celebrating the resurrection? We can worship together. I'm really looking forward to it already, and let's hope and pray that it happens. There's no hiccups between now and then. Really, really something to look forward to. Now, our reading for this morning, we're working our way through the Gospel of John, as you know, and it's the story of Jesus walking on water. It's funny, this story always puts a wry smile on my face, because I went to school in Yorkshire back in the 70s and 80s, and we were always told that the cricketer Geoffrey Boycott would wish to walk on water. Joking aside, enough of this frivolity. John's Gospel, chapter 6, starting to read at verse 16. When evening came, Jesus' disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they'd rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It's I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land towards which they were going. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, as we found out yesterday, Jesus had just fed 5,000 people. A remarkable thing to do, an amazing miracle. And the people are so amazed that John tells us they try and take him away and make him into a king, which is not what he wanted to happen. So Jesus kind of slid off back into the mountains away from the public eye. He didn't want that to happen. The disciples, of course, go down towards the sea. And you get the impression that they kind of waited for Jesus. He'd kind of join them later. But evening's come, it becomes dark, and he hasn't arrived yet. That they knew they had to go, so they set off on the lake anyway. And then they have been rowing 3 or 4 miles, and you get the impression it's choppy water, it's rough, and the wind's blowing hard. It's a hard row. And then they see Jesus walking on the water. And it's a fascinating reading, this one, in all sorts of different ways. Firstly, to say that Jesus walks on the water. I think what this is demonstrating here is the power of Jesus over all things. That Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is Lord of all. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is King. That's what Lord means, including nature. And in Mark's Gospel and so on, you have Jesus stilling the storm and so on. You don't have that in John, but you do have Jesus walking on the water. And I think what John wants us to see here is that Jesus is Lord of everything. Jesus is Lord also of the created order. He's Lord of everything. He's Lord of nature. He knows what he's doing. He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and therefore he's able to walk on water. And I think what this is demonstrating here is that Jesus has power over everything, that he's King of everything, including nature. That's the first thing. The second thing is when Jesus arrives, what does and they see him walking on the water, which must have been a strange sight for anyone, and you can imagine they were terrified. And what does Jesus say? Well, Jesus says what God says more than anything else in the whole Bible. Someone's actually sat down and worked it out. What does God say more than anything else in the whole Bible? Do not be afraid. And Jesus says to disciples, "It's I, do not be afraid." You do not worry, you do not need to worry. And I think there's a wonderful thing here, that Jesus casts out fear. And why does he cast out fear? Because we are totally and unconditionally loved. Because it's Jesus, we know that he loves us so much And because he loves us so much, we do not need to be afraid. What does the Bible say? Perfect love casts out fear. There need be no fear in love, because if you're unconditionally loved, there's nothing to be frightened of. And what's more, Jesus doesn't just love us unconditionally. He's also trustworthy and true and knows what he's doing. You know, he can walk on the water. He's Lord of everything. So he's loving enough that we don't need to be afraid. He's also powerful enough. We do not need to be afraid. And so what did he say to his disciples who were terrified? It's I, he says. Do not be afraid. And I suppose in a sense, he could say the same thing to us today. That whatever we're going through today, we do not need to be afraid of Jesus, because he's both loving enough, wise enough, and powerful enough. And in him, we don't need to be afraid. But the third thing is quite interesting about this version in John, because Matthew and Mark and John all tell the story of Jesus walking on water, but tell it in different ways. Luke, for left, doesn't have it. But in this occasion, as soon as they sort of welcome Jesus into the boat, it says, John says, they've reached their destination. It's quite interesting, this one. As soon as they'd welcomed Jesus into the boat, he says, then they'd immediately reached their destination. And I don't think it means what some people said, that they didn't really see him walking on water, but they actually saw him walking on the beach, but it looked like you. No, I think that's nonsense, because these experienced fishermen, these guys worked this place all the time. It was what they did. They lived on this sea. They kind of worked on this sea. It's what they did. They'll have known the difference. And it's patronising to say otherwise, really. I think that to think of it like that is to think of it far too mechanically. I think what it means is, when Jesus is in the boat of our lives, we have reached our destination. To have Jesus in our boat is enough. I think that's what that means. You know, in a sense, when we have Jesus in our boat, as I said, essentially, we've reached our destination. I remember a few years ago, I went through a tough time in my ministry. And I got to the point at one point when I found myself thinking, my ministry hanging in the balance here. Well, might I be able to get through this? But I went into the chapel here at church and I prayed to God. And I said, as long as you're with me, then actually whatever happens, good, bad or ugly, whatever it may be, whatever the outcome is, as long as you're with me, that's all right. Because to have Jesus is enough. And to have Jesus in the boat of our life effectively is to have reached our destination. To have Jesus is enough. To have Jesus with us is heaven on earth. To have Jesus in our boat is to know that we're unconditionally loved. To have Jesus with us is to know that he's powerful and wise enough and big enough and with us, and that we do not need to be afraid. To have Jesus in our boat effectively means we have reached our destination, because Jesus is enough. So, a fascinating reading here this morning. Jesus walking on water, the John version, reminds us that Jesus is Lord of everything, including nature. That we do not need to be afraid with him around, because we're unconditionally loved. And to have Jesus in the boat of our lives effectively is our destination. Effectively, we do have heaven on earth, and he is with us. Have a lovely weekend. Do join us over the weekend for worship. God bless you, and I'll